Welcome to the Growth Through Adversity podcast, where men are forged, not coddled. Here we dive deep into the path of true transformation in pursuit of physical, mental, spiritual, and temporal growth. We talk training, nutrition, business, mindset, and spirituality. We embrace strength and we loathe ease. We reject weakness in every form and cultivate power, the will to power itself. This is the rebirth of modern man. Raw masculinity, tempered by reason, virtue, and right action, because nothing of value is earned without sacrifice. Let's begin our apotheosis together. Welcome to the Growth Through Adversity podcast. We are in episode 2 of the mini-series with Dr. Cody Crockett. If you haven't watched episode 1, I suggest you go back and start there and then cycle back and watch this one, because we're going to kind of although it's different topics, we are going to kind of build off some of the ideas that we've laid out in the framework that we've built in the first one. So today we are going to be talking about rites of passage and redefining masculinity in a culture of weakness. Now, rites of passage is not something you hear very often, but I believe personally from my research, and I have researched this extensively, that it is an integral part of the masculine psyche, really the human psyche in general. I do believe women had their own rites of passages within tribal society, prehistoric tribal society. But I don't think they played as important of a role psychologically, maybe, as the masculine rites of passage did, just because of some biological differences between men and women and what we evolved to do. And so we're going to kind of talk about that, because I kind of believe that we live in a culture today that sedates men. It softens them. It lies to them about what manhood is. And we kind of hit on that a little bit in the last one. But there is an overt attack on masculinity. And even talking about these kind of things, I mean, we'll probably get blowback from this episode, but I don't think you or I give a shit, because it's true. And it's all very positive and constructive stuff, but it's not a popular topic today. I think that there is kind of a movement to androgynize society and just kind of remove like gender polarity. And it's essential. And I mean, we kind of went into it last week, where we're not taking anything away from women at all. Quite the contrary. We're stating that men and women are fundamentally different, and women are amazing, and they do some things that we can't do, and we do some things that they can't do. And together the whole makes like a cohesive, it's a beautiful pair. And it's the whole difference in gender and polarity is what makes the world work, I believe, and what makes society work. So, but every day we hear, like, we live in this, like, it's like they frame it as like self-care and self-love, but it's really like when you're reading these posts and when you're just getting you're just getting inundated with this narrative that like you're okay as you are, you don't need to push yourself. You need to be comfortable. You need to be gentle with yourself. You need to love yourself. They're telling you to basically embrace ease. And what I believe is that you need to embrace struggle. I believe that pain is holy, and that ties very heavily into initiation. And that is really where you discover who you are. And I have a quote from Saxo Grammaticus that was speaking of his Danish ancestors in the 13th century. And he said, men used to loathe ease. They used to make it their business to pick quarrels, to start up old feuds, and always choose soldiering over peace. And that's always caught me, especially the quote, men used to loathe ease. They used to hate ease. Anything that was easy essentially made you weak and made you complacent. And in ancient society, tribal society, that would probably get you killed. So again, I believe this is the masculine way. I believe this is tied very heavily into masculine psychology. And I believe it is totally missing in modern society unless you seek it out. So I want to kind of talk about all of that stuff, and then probably a good place to start, and I'll let you kind of open it up here. And actually what got me to follow your page a long time ago, before I even met you, we went to the same gym. You did a post, you were like skiing somewhere fucking crazy, probably the Swiss Alps or somewhere super badass, but you had a picture of a cave, right? And you'd found this cave while you're out skiing, and you talked about how that used to be tied into like initiatory rites where boys would go into the cave and they would come out men, and that's tied heavily into like the death and rebirth. And I was like, man, that's like, because that's, I knew exactly what you're talking about, but I feel like a lot of people didn't know what you were talking about. So probably a good place to start here would be like the hero's journey, where you go, there's the departure, you leave the known world, the child's world, you go through ordeal, you go through struggle, you're a fool, you're an idiot, and the old self dies, symbolically through this process of suffering and growth. And then you have this rebirth where you're reborn, you're strong, you have new knowledge, you have new capabilities. And it's almost like that transition from child to warrior to king. And then you're able to integrate back into your society, and you're able to lead, and you're able to protect, and you're able to serve. And so maybe you can take over from here and just talk about like initiatory frameworks and how they play into our psyche and why they're important, and just kind of, I don't know, just fire away, man. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on all this.
Yeah, dude, I'm fired up. Well, this is a very powerful topic, and this is something that if we start first just begin by looking at this concept of initiation into manhood or womanhood. And modern day, that's been removed. So we're in a world now where we have all these uh, male developed bodies that would be considered a man, but it's a boy in that body. That boy hasn't gone through initiation into manhood. So we're in this world now where we have all these men that are actually boys in these bodies that are hyper feminized. And the reason for that is because this initiation into manhood has been removed. We no longer go through this tribal process where we're initiated by going out on a hunt for the first time, or multiple different rituals that initiate a man into manhood, that gives him that defining point of, hey, I was a boy yesterday, I'm a man now. Where women, they have this biologically built into them. When a woman starts menstruating, that's her initiation into womanhood. And that hasn't gone anywhere. That's always going to be there. In fact, it's happening sooner and sooner because of many environmental and social factors. But that's always there for women. So for men, this is critically important because we need to feel like we are surrounded by peers of men who that we can be respected, and that who reflect that version of being a man back to us. And now, when I was younger, it's more boys played sports, and that was where a lot of boys got into more of that male initiation into doing challenging things, getting their ass beat a little bit through, getting their head knocked, bell rung, playing football. And that was more of an initiation into, here's your group of men that you get to be a part of, your tribe. And you're going to war against this other team. And this is what brings you into, we need to team up together and take them down and take that ball and get it to this goal across the finish line. And now in a world where we have less boys playing sports, and now sports are almost looked at as something that is offensive, or something that people get they get offended by, and they think that this is something that's making boys competitive in competitions bad. Well, there's such this disconnect in why men were lacking such a positive examples of masculinity, not modern days, because those boys are in these men's bodies, and we're looking to boys to understand how to be a man when they've never been initiated. So whether it was through sports, whether it's through going on a hunt, doing difficult things, and I think we can get deeper into this of intentionally doing difficult things. And this is where the gym comes into play. If you have a controlled environment where you can intentionally and deliberately go and do difficult things, this is what builds character up. So when we look at where the direction of everything's headed with initiations and rituals, well, we live in a world where we have all of these things vying for our attention, and we are getting these hits of dopamine that we haven't earned, that we haven't worked for, and that we haven't deserved. And it's making men softer because it gives them those rewards. It lights up these systems to make them feel like they've done something or they've accomplished something, when in fact it's just they're still in this hollow shell of getting these artificial hits of dopamine that they haven't earned. And in part, there's going to be an interesting shift as we move forward, and there's more loss of jobs and because of AI, and there's going to need to be systems that get put into place to help initiate men and to give them something to do, because men have to have a purpose. Men, they build themselves into who they become by doing things. They have to create their value. And this is where a lot of younger men haven't done difficult things and they haven't created value to be able to offer. And this is where a lot of women are attracted to older men, men that are older than them, because they've actually done something, created value. And, again, this is not to take anything away from women, but if you look at what a woman is, her value is perceived as is her beauty, her youth, her femininity. So just by a woman being born and being beautiful, attractive, having feminine energy, that is just societally what tends to be what her value is assigned as. Where men, it's like none of that applies to men. We have to actually go out and do things, but we lack that system of initiation and those rituals. And by being very intentional, even coming into this conversation today, I could show up and I can just, have no practice, no routine about going through and getting prepared, make sure I got good food, hydration, some movement, taking some notes, getting in the right frame. Like, that's being intentional, and that's being more mindful about how we do things, rather than living in this world that promotes mindlessness and scrolling and lack of responsibility. So I think this concept of initiation and being almost creating rituals about things, it's very powerful, and it's something that's what masculinity is. It's creating a container of strength, of intentionality, of almost a level of restraint, in a way, of not being so persuade and so flowy and that you just blow over in the wind because you're so soft that some sort of environmental factor, or if it's raining one day and you decide, oh, I'm not going to go to the gym because it's raining outside and I'll melt if I go in the rain because I'm so soft and sweet. Well, that's going to result in that man drifting backwards in society, or just being one of the many men, one of the many statistics of men who are unfulfilled, that struggle with mental illness, that don't have a community, and that are struggling from this life of loneliness. So I know it seems like there's a lot there, but it does all come back to this concept of taking a boy through this journey, through the hero's journey, to go through, do the difficult things, slay the dragon, and then on the other side be recognized by his peers as having done something worth a damn that deserves respect.
That was really well put, and I think it jumped out at me when you spoke about the differences between men and women and you kind of almost touched on sexual selection. So women basically select their mates, right? That's how human primates, that's how we reproduce. And that's, in modern society, it obviously makes sense, but that's something that's a part of us forever. And it makes a lot of sense because women have to be very selective. They have a very finite amount of offspring that they can have in their life. And if they don't selective with their mates, then they're going to have deadbeat fucking mates. And in ancient times, that probably meant that her and the kid died. In modern society, it just means they have some asshole who won't pay them child support and all that kind of stuff. But so that put a lot of impetus behind these masculine rites of passage, because not only did you have to pass into manhood, but you had to compete with your peers to end up with a decent mate or any mate at all, which is obviously something men could be theoretically a lot less selective with our mates because, we can reproduce basically exponentially in our life physically, right? Women can't physically, right? There's obviously reasons why you wouldn't want to, but so it's interesting. So there was a highly competitive atmosphere even within. And so now remember, go back to tribal society where we spent 99% of our evolution, right? Is, a small group. It's 50, 100 people. And so you're competing, not only obviously protecting that tribe from external threats, but you are competing within that tribe for a very limited amount of resources and a limited amount of mates. And these initiatory rites of passage were kind of ways where A, they honed you and they taught you, and B, where it was kind of a meritocracy where the best could rise to the top and, the average could kind of settle in the middle and the useless would probably wouldn't make it through. Like I know Sparta, which kind of like institutionalized this rite of passage from 7 years old to 20 years old, and they kind of took it to a whole nother level. I read somewhere that there was like a 30 to 60% attrition rate in that on survival. So like 30 to 60% of boys that started the Agoge didn't even survive it. That's how brutal this process was. And that's what it required to become a Spartan and a man and an actual member of the society. Whereas now that's just conferred on you at birth. So, and honestly, I think there's a deep and fundamental part of our spirit that craves that. Like we want to prove ourselves, we want to be tested. And we live in a society that makes that very difficult. So we search it, we seek it out. And like you said, a healthy way is sports. Like that's the most tribal thing there is. And it's really good for boys because we come together as boys and we work as a cohesive team. And, you know, you kind of create a hierarchy. There's a lot of bullying, which I think is honestly healthy. It kind of it teaches boys how to stand up for themselves, and that's obviously something that's like totally villainized and demonized in modern society. But I remember when I was a kid, one of the best experiences I ever had was I played baseball, and there was a kid. He was the all-star on the team, our shortstop, and he was bigger than all of us, and he was really athletic, and he terrorized us, you know, that whole year. And you know, and he was the bully, and we were all afraid of him. And I like I don't know what snapped, but I got tired of him at the end of the season, and I just hit him, right? And I thought he was going to whoop my ass, and I was fucking terrified. And to my surprise, like he went down to the ground and started crying. This was before I started boxing. I didn't know it. I just got lucky, or he was just weak, one of the two. But it taught me a lesson that like no matter how scared you are and no matter how tough they seem, like you can stand up for yourself and the results might surprise you. And my dad was the coach. And I remember, like, you know, I got in a little bit of trouble for it, but he was actually impressed. He was actually proud. And because you have to figure that out as a boy, or like you said, you end up as a hollow shell that just gets blown over in the wind. And now, obviously, like, you've got to learn how to temper that with like reason and right action. And you hit it right on the head when you said restraint, because that's definitely a part of manhood. Masculinity can be pretty raw, and it can be primordial, and it can be aggressive. And so learning how to temper that is the other part of these initiatory rituals, right? It's learning how to control your power, right? To control, because to become dangerous, but to become restrained and dangerous, to where that's very selective. Because if not, then you're just a chaotic force and you destroy everything around you that you love. And that's the antithesis of masculinity. So all of that is like, I believe, the essence of this, and it's missing in modern society. So we seek it in healthy ways like sports, right? But then also you see this, like, I mean, this massive rise in gangs and in negative expressions of this desire for the band of men, the oath-bound band of heroes. Like we all crave that on a fundamental level. And if you have a society that denies it to you, then you know the motorcycle clubs and everything else it's like it's an expression of that. And sometimes it can be a very healthy expression, and sometimes it can be a very negative expression. And that's why I think it's so important that men understand this and they help their children, their sons, through this process. Because if they don't, their sons are going to go through it on their own, and we're going to hope that they go through it in a healthy fashion. But I didn't go through it in a healthy fashion. I went through it in a very unhealthy fashion. And it's what really got me into this. And it's what really got me into understanding the deeper components behind it. Because all boys crave it, you know, and then men still crave it. So, like with that, I think it kind of ties right into the next concept I have it here in my notes. And it's like there's this initiative and there's this instinctual call towards initiation within men, because it's so deeply ingrained in our psyche and in what was basically our survival mechanism for many thousands of years. Because if you didn't undergo this initiation, you didn't have a spot in the tribe, right? There was a point where that they weren't just going to carry dead weight, right? That's a modern society thing. There it was more, I look at it more like a pack, right? Than as opposed to a herd. It's like you will contribute to the pack or the pack will turn on you at some point, right? And so it was essential that you underwent this. And I think another fascinating thing about these ancient rites of passage and ancient societies as a whole is that childhood ended abruptly. It wasn't really like a transition. and like a slow process like it is today, where, well, I mean, today there's 30-year-olds that are still children that still live with their parents and play video games in their basement all day, that which is fucking insane to me. But it was like, it was seen as a death. It was seen as the child died and the man was reborn. You were a whole different person. Often there would be a naming ritual where you would take your adult name, your man name. And so this urge to test oneself, to face danger, and to be a longing to be part of this brotherhood of tested men, right? Of proven men. And the German term for it is the Mannerbund, which I think encapsulates it very well, which were these ancient warrior bands of like Indo-European cultures. And what's kind of cool about this is that it spans all of the Indo-European descendant cultures, whether you're looking at Germanic, Celtic, Vedic, there's all this institution, and it was very simple in how it was put together. Once the boys reached a certain age, that whole age set was taken away from the women, from society, from anything that would coddle them, anything that would make them soft, anything that would make them weak. And then they were given to these hard warriors that lived out in the forest and were professional fighters and were these esteemed and respected members of society. And they would spend a time with them, and during that time they were seen as basically dead to the tribe. They were in a liminal phase between life and death, and they would undergo all these hardships. There's all these stories of killing animals, killing a bear with a spear, or whatever. There's all kinds of sub rituals within this. But the main theme of it was to undergo these hardships, to learn how to starve, to learn how to be hungry, to learn how to be self-sufficient and how to survive, and how to be a productive member of what society required of them at that time, how to be a productive protector and provider. And then if they survived this process, then they would be reborn as men and would rejoin the tribe. And I can't really stress enough that it was literally seen as like a symbolic death. And I think we have a very modern interpretation of death, and it's almost always seen as negative, and there's almost always negative connotations to it. And it's obviously something that's feared. I think that's a deep human fear, a fear of our own mortality, right? Um, but in ancient society, I think it was kind of more fluid on the concept of death. And they believed that we underwent many different deaths. Our physical was just one of them, right? And one of them was this death and rebirth as a man. And I think that's kind of an underlying theme in these rituals, is that you have to be in a constant process of recreating yourself and being reborn, or else you're basically stagnant, because life is ever evolving, life is ever changing. As you go through the different phases of your life, you're changing, and what's expected of you is changing, right? What's expected of a 20-year-old is different than what's expected of a 50-year-old in every facet of society and existence. So if you're not constantly going through these process, you end up, like you said, as this hollow shell that is just a man child stuck in an adult's body. And that's not only, it's dangerous is what it is, but it's also very ineffective. So maybe you can share some of your thoughts on that and kind of what you think about all that. I'm sorry, I know I went on a diatribe there.
Dude, it's to directly off your last like two sentences right there. What happens if a boy grows up and he's in this man's body and he's never gone through this initiation? Well, that's where we end up with what I would call the true toxic masculinity, where you have this boy that is reckless, has this reckless energy. He thinks he's this man, but he doesn't know how to control this energy. And it for me, it brings up this the quote of Jordan Peterson saying, "You become a monster and then you learn how to control it." And that's ultimately like a man, a boy has to go through this process to do hard things, to grow himself and to overcome something in order to see that he can build himself up as a man and understand what it means to be a man, to have physical strength, to have the mental strength, to have emotional strength, to be able to withstand if your wife, if your woman's having a difficult time and unloading and screaming at you or hitting you or whatever it is. You need to be able to be that immovable force, that unmovable mountain that can stay there and be able to take it, be able to weather the storm. And a boy doesn't do that. A boy falls on the ground, cries, beats his hands, whatever it may be, or he attacks, he retaliates. And for a man that builds himself up, goes through that warrior, becomes the king through understanding how to balance the aspects of the mind of the magician, of the lover, and how to bring that full circle and learn how to balance and use those, how to use those energies appropriately. And that's what I see distinguishes the boys from the men is the boy has gone through that process. On the other side of it, he's been the warrior. He's learned, he's gained the wisdom, he's learned how to love, or he's in that process of learning how to do that. And then bringing that all together. And that's what that practice ultimately becomes the embodiment of the king archetype. Now we don't have a world that supports that process anymore, right? So we don't have that journey. And in a way, the West, whether we say the West is America or Western Europe, boys have been robbed, men have been robbed of that process. And I say that in a way of where men have no longer been required to go through and do these difficult things. No longer are they being pushed into sports because sports have become offensive and we want to give everybody a trophy for just competing. No, there needs to be losers, there needs to be winners, because the people that lose use that to light the fire to become a winner. And Michael Jordan, perfect example. There's many different examples of this, but you have to lose, and it's through losing, whether that's in physical competitions or whether that's in business. The more that you can lose and the more that you can fail, the more you can learn what isn't working, and that helps you to then refine yourself and build yourself up. And that in itself is an initiation process. But men have become robbed of that, and in a way it's related to institutions, government trying to replace the father. And we could go down the spiritual rabbit hole of that, of God, any sort of higher belief, higher power has been removed from the government. That's been removed from our institutions. And now it's almost like women are incentivized to seek divorces because of the way that the system's built in place. And that does men a great disservice. And that causes this rift between men and women and almost pins us against each other, when instead of removing God or removing a higher power and removing the father from families, now the government is trying to come in and replace that and say, you can go and you can do your thing. We're going to give you money. Your ex-husband's going to pay child support, alimony, or we're going to give you benefits from the government so that you don't have to find a father, you don't have to find a man. But that's where my perspective is, that there's been this sort of ripping apart. And I think it is more of a spiritual war that's going on here. And it's something that it's deep, and it goes deep, and on the surface it may not be easy to see, but when you look deep into it, and a lot of the symbolisms and a lot of the litigation and a lot of the policy, how the system is designed, it is designed against men. It's designed to prevent men from going through that journey and building themselves up and being strong men. The government, institutions, the system does not want strong men because that's a threat.
Very well said, and I could not agree more. Like that is something I've snapped to too, and I believe it 100%. And I don't even think that's conspiracy theory. I just think that's well established. I mean, a population of sheep is much easier to control than a population of wolves, 100%. So there's obviously any governing body that is going to be what they trend towards, right? That's going to be what they ultimately want. And especially because we don't live in tribes anymore, right? We live in nations where you have many different cultures, you have many different peoples, you have millions of people, which is so alien to our psyche, and how, I mean, we're just really unable to even grasp it, I think, at a like a fundamental level. I don't think our brain is wired to go that far to consider that many people as part of our tribe.
No.
They tried to make the nation the tribe with the propaganda of the 1800s, but and a nation is necessary. That's the modern world we live in. Obviously, it makes sense. Um, but obviously, like, there's a lot of issues that we're having too, and I couldn't agree more with the marriage. And the only thing I would add to that was, I think it's also a disservice to women, because, like you said, I think that women, like men, crave all of the things that we've been talking about. I think women crave a strong man, and I think that women crave having a strong man and a leader in their life. And that doesn't mean like somebody that dominates them in every facet, but that means like somebody that they can rely on. in anything, you know what I mean, that they know will protect them and provide for them and be there for them and be there for any children that they have together, and just fill that role that they crave. It's the masculine and is assertive, and the feminine is receptive. And I think that is something that, whether women want to admit it or not, I know my fiance has admitted it to me, and without any issue or any hesitation, you know, is they want a strong man. They want a strong man that they can follow and that they can stand beside. And modern society has, like you said, there's all kinds of things that undermine that. And so I'm getting married in a couple weeks now, actually, and it's my first marriage at 36, because I hold the institution of marriage to be something that's very holy. And you're absolutely right. To me, it's not a legal contract at all, although they've whittled their way into it and made it more legal than anything else. But to me, it is an entirely religious and spiritual contract. Although we did have to go get a marriage license from the courthouse. So there is definitely a legal component to it, but you're absolutely right. And when you look at it as a spiritual contract, it becomes basically invulnerable, right? And that's why I think you didn't see divorce rates, even in the 50s, even in our grandparents. I mean, my grandparents are still together. You just didn't see that until very recently. I mean, people, except for in very extreme cases where they were probably really justified, people work shit out. You know what I mean? Because no relationship is ever going to be perfect. So you can just fucking give up on it and get a divorce and, you know, marry somebody else in 60 days. That seems to be the modern trend. Or you can do the hard thing. Like you said, we've been talking about doing hard things, right? And you can work on it, you know, and you can try to make it better. And then it gets really better over time when you do that over and over again. So, I'll also touch on you know, you said, if we don't undergo these rites of passage and we don't learn to, like, I like to describe it in kind of Norse terms as, there's the story of binding the Fenris wolf, and the Fenris wolf is like the epitome of chaos, right? It is born from chaos, and it's ultimately going to kill the chief deity in the you know, the Norse version of Armageddon, Ragnarok, and it is a force of pure chaos. And so they bind it, and the only god that was brave enough to bind it had to sacrifice his hand in doing so. And I believe that's like symbolic of something that's in all of us, especially men. Is there is an animal within us, there is a beast within us, and it's necessary and you need it, but you have to be in control of that beast, because when that beast gets unleashed, just like when Fenris gets unleashed, it is nothing but chaos and it destroys everything in its path. And I saw that a lot in prison. I saw a lot of guys that had a lot of really strong masculine attributes in like the aggression, in like the assertiveness, and like they didn't back down, because that's the world of prison. You see, there's a lot of very like archaic um rules like that in there that you adhere to. So you see a lot of that, but what they lacked was the ability to control it. So they could never integrate into society. They could never integrate into like a healthy relationship or anything, because they were just never able. It was just pure chaos, right? So I do think that that is the downside. I think that's the, you either have one extreme or the other. Guys either end up as like just totally feminized and, you know, and just falling into that societal trap and just becoming totally like fangless. Or they go towards the other extreme and they just don't understand. They are unable to bind the chaos within, and then they're just dangerous, right? Then they're just a fucking loose cannon. So like I love that quote by Peterson, man. First you become a monster and then you learn to control it, because it is so fucking true. So speaking of monsters and wolves, that falls kind of right into, do you have to go right now?
No, I'm good.
Okay, I
Yeah,
could go. I'm not in a hurry to get right out of there right this second. Okay, I know it's
I got a max of 30 minutes.
okay, cool. That's as long as I can push it to.
Yeah, I'm good.
Perfect. All right. So there's, and again, when we read ancient texts, and when we try to look for the symbolic meaning in them, and a lot of like the stuff, and obviously like I'm a little obsessed with the Norse current, so a lot of that stuff was passed down as oral traditions, and then it was recorded after Europe was Christianized, right? So a lot of it survived in these sagas and in these manuscripts, which is really cool. And there's a concept in, at least, and I know it pops up in Native American mythology quite a bit too, but I'm less well versed in it, so I won't talk about that. I'll talk about what I know about. And I know that the cult of the wolf, and the cult and the idea, the concept of the werewolf is something that's pretty universal in all Indo-European daughter cultures, right? And I think it ties heavily within into initiation of becoming the wolf, of becoming the monster, of unleashing the monster, and then learning to control that monster. And so one of the coolest stories is from the Volsung saga, and it follows this family. It probably dates back to sometime in the migration age, maybe the 300s or 400s. Um, um, the 300s or 400s common era. Hard to say. It was recorded in like the 12 or 1300s, but it tells the story of this family, and this family is, and obviously it's a saga, so there's like divine origins. They're descended from one of the gods, and there's Volsung, and he has 10 sons and one daughter, and so they marry this daughter off to this king, and there's a dispute over a sword, and it's kind of like the Arthurian legend where whoever can draw the sword from the tree is worthy of wielding it, and it's one of Volsung's sons that draws it, but the king that Sigir, that the girl's marrying, wants it, but he's not worthy of it, right? So he tries to buy it from him, like a wretch will do, and they won't. It's not for sale. He earned it. So he decides to plot their demise, and eventually they come to visit, and he kills Volsung and all of them except for one, and Sigmund escapes, and he goes into the forest, and there's this whole plot where he ends up having a child with his sister, because that would be the only one that would be worthy of this task of revenge. And they become wolves. They find these wolf pelts and they run around the woods, and they just basically indiscriminately kill all travelers and everybody that's traveling through this king's woods, and they just cause all kinds of havoc, and they end up even killing each other. And then they're like, there's a magical leaf, and they bring each other back to life, but they end up fulfilling this, getting out of the wolf skins and fulfilling this task of revenge. But I think that idea of, and obviously it's heavily mythologized, but the idea of the werewolf is exactly what we're talking about here. It is, there were these tribes and these bands of men that were undergoing these initiations, and they lived and fought basically like beasts, and they learned to unleash that beast within. They learned to unleash that, and that's the name of my brand, by the way, and it ties heavily into all this. But then the second half of that was they learned to control it and to release it when they needed to release it. You can talk about the berserkers who went mad in battle, but they were like the king's guard. So they weren't obviously like psychopaths, because the king trusted them to protect his infant children. And so I think that idea of, and I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but the idea, it tied heavily into ancient society, and it's virtually missing, but we see so much sickness in young men. We see so much just lack of purpose. We see so much lack of drive. We see so much just senseless anger. We see so many just lost souls. And I think it's because they've never underwent this process. They're not even aware of this process. And it's like villainized that they have these impulses to be wild, to be, you know what I mean? To live wild, to push the boundaries, and then they try to just like confine them in classrooms and medicate them with Ritalin. And obviously that doesn't solve any of this. This is an internal process. And I guess I'm just, again, a diatribe, but I guess I'm just, curious on your thoughts on this, and kind of like that whole idea of that young man's angst, or that young boy's angst, and that just desire to undergo this process, and it being denied to him, and the kind of effects that has on him.
Yeah, man, dude, it hits home because I was one of the kids in second grade that they tried to medicate on Ritalin because I had energy. I had, everything that we're talking about. I felt like I needed to get it out. I needed to do something. I had this energy that I needed to put into something, and I couldn't control it. I mean, at that age, you're immature and you haven't gone through that process. But spoiler alert, I never went on the medication, decided, no, that's not a good move. And there was natural ways to overcome that. And through that was in a way kind of a jumping off point for me with holistic health, and finding out that I was allergic to certain things like these food dyes, red 40, yellow 5. I'm allergic to those things. And that was causing a lot of this hyperactivity, as they say, but it was tied directly to, they're getting us to sit in these rooms for 6 to 8 hours a day, to sit still, behave like a good little boy. And that's so far disconnected from what our true roots are as men, as boys. And so we end up with this world where if we have this boy that continues to have this energy but never goes through this initiation process, we end up with these men or these boys in men's bodies. And what do? They feel like this sense of that they want to do something, that they're missing something, that they're lacking something in life. A lot of them, they seek video games because video games give a false sense of the hero's journey. These are all specifically designed based off of the hero's journey. And that's why a lot of boys, a lot of even men are drawn to that, because that gives them a sense of being on this journey, on this path of growth, of development, of constantly seeing how their attributes grow, of they're getting new points in their skill or their language or their physique, or just up leveling. So it gives this sort of progression in life in this false sense, or it fills this void where they feel like they haven't been fulfilled and that they're just always lacking something. And that's what a lot of men resort to video games, are trying to fill this void instead of going inward and realizing that they're actually may be in a man's body, but they're actually very immature. And that's through the path of becoming the monster. Is the boy that goes through that path, he's immature at the time. So there's this energy that's chaotic that needs to be learn how to cultivate it. And you may end up overcorrecting and, choking a couple people out when you didn't really mean to completely kill them, but you might have, kind of overgone a little bit. And so learning how to calibrate and control that energy. And then from there, that's where he then embodies that full, aspect of the king, of after the dragon's been slayed and he's gained the knowledge and the skills and the confidence, and then he can go back and then he can then be that man. But that's where I see a lot of this is it's a result. It results with a lot of boys. And, when I'm saying boys, this could be in their 20s, in their 30s, but if you look on social media, a lot of boys have never gone through this process of any sort of initiation. They've never taken a life or killed an animal. We could talk about that and the power of the sacredness of taking a life and seeing how that's very sacred. And that's a big initiation point for a lot of people. And the hunt that's a famous one, right? But seeing how they've never gone through this, and this results in these boys scrolling on social media, looking at people that they look to as being leaders or role models, and they try to just cherry pick these certain things that this person says, or Andrew Tate says this, or he treats women like that, so I should do that too. When in reality, it's like, no, dude, you haven't gone through the process of initiation. You're not a man. You are a boy trying to cherry pick tactics and techniques when you don't have the level of beingness. You haven't embodied that beingness of being that man that has those values and those virtues. And therefore, that's where you can end up in this process, or this being in, what do they call it? Where you're like a poser. You feel like you're imposter syndrome. Is these guys, these boys that are trying to take these things from these men without actually having gone through that process. So they're at like level 2 and trying to jump to level 5 without going through that initiation process of levels 2, 3, and 4. So it's like so many people are trying to start that process, or to skip through the process, when it's the hero's journey for a reason. It's because it's a process that you get to go through. And if you skip any part of that process, you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to recorrect and learn those lessons again. And there may be parts of the process that you think you're on the right track. And then you realize, oh shit, well, that wasn't the right move. I'm over calibrated. Now I need to backtrack a bit, relearn this lesson, and then I can move forward. And a perfect example of that is in relationships too, modern day. So if you are very immature with relationships and you go down the rabbit hole and you get yourself involved with a woman that you go deep in this relationship, but you haven't learned the lessons, or you're bringing forward baggage from your past that you haven't overcome, that's then going to be exposed. Same thing in business. If you have limiting beliefs in yourself or your past and stories that are holding you back, starting a business or starting a marriage are the number 1 and 2 fastest ways to accelerate your personal growth, is because you're going to have to level yourself up and overcome and face a lot of your demons in the process. And people don't think about that. But the more that these things, these paths of initiation, which a business, great path of initiation, relationship, another great path of initiation. But by these boys not going through these processes, or not even having a mentor, like a man that they can look to, a father, a role model to lead them through that, they try to find shortcuts to do this, and it doesn't work like that. And it's unfortunate because we end up with all of these, the dating scene like nowadays in 2025 is, it's a fucking disaster. And it's, that's a whole nother podcast series in itself. But it's a shame because some of the guys get it, and the guys who get it, and the guys that really level up their health and their mind, and they embody what that king archetype is. A lot of women may not recognize that, but on a deeper instinctual level, their bodies recognize that. They think they want something because they've been told something, and this goes for men too. But when we look at what people respond to and what speaks to their soul and stinks to their biological wiring, it's completely different than what the mind is being told. So I think this whole concept, this whole discussion here is so critically important, and I wish we had a better solution that we could offer. You know, Working with people with the content that I put out, the content that you put out, I think it's both of our intentions to be able to help people with this, and even if it's a golden nugget that they can take and that helps them to, motivate them, or to start a new habit, or to kick an old habit, to start that process, or to at least have the veil lifted and be able to see what it looks like to move forward as a strong, confident, masculine man in a healthy way. I think that's really what I look at as my greatest service to humanity, is to help guys to optimize their health, their mind, and to be better men in their relationships and their business. And one by one, yeah, it can make a difference in these individual lives, but I think the greater intention is to get enough reach to speak this message and to be an example through how I show up on a daily basis, to provide a sort of an example, to be a sort of role model, and to kind of, at least show that what's possible. And for those men that actually want the support, the accountability, that may not have a family or a father or a role model, a mentor, to be a source that they can at least rely on or have a conversation with, to do my part in trying to help moving things forward. And not everybody will understand that. I mean, I still get labeled a misogynist or a radical right winger or whatever it may be. And it's like, it just tells me how limited people's minds are, because it's just so not that way.
Yeah, totally, dude. And that was all like really, really good points. And I think you hit on a few things that I want to double back on right at the end there. The concept of a mentor, it's almost villainized in modernity, which is so weird. But there's so many weird connotations that come up with it now, because unfortunately it has we live in a very strange age. But I think it's so critical, man. Like, and whether that's your father or somebody else, like having somebody that you look up to that is legitimately a good example, that is further ahead than you at every level of your life, from fucking tiny childhood to adulthood. Like it's so critical. And then if they take the time to invest in you actually learning and actually teaching you things on a personal level, then it's even better. But and that kind of ties into the other thing, but that I was thinking too, is like, and you hit it on the head, man, is that I feel like we don't even have heroes anymore. You know what I mean? Like the people that are idolized in our modern society, like the professional athletes, every once in a while there's a good one in there, but 90% of them are consummate degenerates. But it's who kids look up to now. And so they're not looking up to like, Beowulf anymore. They're not looking up to like this archetype of strength and of masculinity and of self-sacrifice and of like higher ideals and of just greatness and glory. They're looking up to, dudes who beat their wives and cheat on their wives and are the only real thing that they contribute to society is they're really good at throwing a ball at a hoop. You know what I mean? But on like an individual level, they're horrible people. So that is unfortunate. And
Or Hollywood.
or even worse.
Hollywood.
Yeah,
Mhm.
even apps. Great point. Even worse. Yeah. So I think that is like intentional, 100%. There's no question in my mind, and
100%.
it's yeah, and it's very very disturbing. But then you kind of tapped on you kind of tapped on rituals, and you're right. And I do wish we had a better solution, but it's so difficult because there's so much. Because again, we're not a tribe. If we were a tribe of 50 people, it would be very easy to come up with a set of rituals that fit our culture and that fit, exactly what we're trying to do. And I think that's why it's important for people to find something that maybe equates to a tribe in some way, and it's difficult in modernity, but you're starting to see more of it, more and more of it. There's all kinds of like alternative groups, and there's all kinds of subcultures, and I'm hoping that some of those will evolve in positive directions and kind of provide some of this, and some of them do. But ritual is so personal. But like, I don't think people realize how tied to how our psyches are tied to ritual. Like everything we do is a ritual, right? Like you going around your house at night and making sure all the doors are locked so that you and your family are safe. It's like it's a ritual pattern, right? Like I know the fucking doors are locked. I locked them when I came in, but it's like if I don't do it, I won't be able to sleep, right? So everything we do is a ritual. And our brains, I think, are wired for ritualistic behavior, right? And so because we don't have an answer on exactly how to integrate this into our lives, what I kind of same thing, all the guys that I work with, I like encourage them to test themselves, to push themselves, to challenge themselves. And the gym is a great medium to start it. But as guys, like I have guys that have been with me for 3 or 4 years, and have like I have one dude who's like my all-star. He lost over 100 pounds and built like 30 pounds of muscle according to his DEXA scan. I mean, just went from like fat and like unable to go up a flight of stairs without getting winded, and just miserable, hated himself, was just so dissatisfied with where he'd let himself go, to now he's like shredded. He looks like you and I do. And like I encouraged him to start jujitsu, to start MMA, like, and now he's talking about starting his own business. So like what happens is when you invest in this physical process, it opens all kinds of other doors to you because you show yourself you're capable. You undergo an initiation, a rite of passage. You show yourself to 300-pound him 3 years ago. The idea of jujitsu wasn't even a fucking thing. There was no reality where he would have been able to even get down on the mats and stand back up. So you prove that you were able to do something you were never able to do before. And now it's like, okay, so now maybe I can do jujitsu. Now he's getting good. Now he's choking people out. Now he's fucking doing MMA. And so, and now it's like, okay, I can do all this new stuff. So, right. And I'm doing all this shit I never thought I could. So now I can start a business. I can quit my fucking job that I hate, you know what I mean? And not have to listen to fucking idiots, and I can work for myself. And so it just opens up all kinds of doors. And the key, like the underlying principle, I think that you have to keep hold of is you have to constantly make yourself uncomfortable. You like pain and struggle are holy. Like if you just look at it like that and wrap your mind around that and seek out the path of most resistance, the shit that takes you out of your comfort zone and is the most fucking uncomfortable, then you're gonna do great. And you're gonna fail. But failure is like you said, that's how we learn. Like that's how the human brain learns. So like is we trial and error. We try something and it doesn't work. And if we survive, then we know, okay, well, that doesn't work. So I'll do it different every time. And every time you get a little bit better, right? And every time more and more of what doesn't work and more of what does work. And so then you can just start to double down and just replicate and build on that. So I think all that is the key, is just finding the things that challenge you and investing in them, and investing in making yourself uncomfortable, and just constantly like testing yourself and asking yourself, like, when you have a choice of, okay, this weekend, do I want to sit on my couch and drink beer? Um, or do I want to go do something that I really don't want to go do? You know what I mean? And we all have those things. Like, what have you been putting off? Like, what is, like, go fucking do it, right? And so, and you also hit on the Ritalin thing. I feel like we're pretty close in age, and I was in that generation too, and they doped the fuck out of me as a kid. And because I was wild, like to another level of wild. And I believe it was just healthy, normal, masculine boyhood stuff, but they don't want you bouncing off the fucking walls in the classroom. So yeah, they doped me, and my dad was pretty against it, but the school fucking coerced us into it. Um, and I did that for a while, but I got to where I would cheat that is the most awful feeling in the it is like you are just it is like lobotomized, you know, it's like you are just not yourself. And that kind of gave me an overall mistrust of psychiatrists, of officials, of doctors, of medicine, of I'm still reluctant to take medication at this stage in my life. Like, you know, it gave me a mistrust of the whole system, which I think has been beneficial to me in the long run. So I'm kind of glad I went through it, but I'm definitely like fervently and vehemently against it.
Which is healthy, right? I mean, people should be skeptical. I mean, when you look at who your politicians are and who the previous was it the health secretary?
Yeah.
I mean, come on now. They're trying to gaslight us. That's absolutely just a different kind of a monster, but that's you look at what they tell us, it's you should be skeptical. Anything that I see now, anything that's out there is be I mean, educate yourself, do your own research. And yeah, it does take more work, but people should stay skeptical is the thing. And you said something of, the challenges. So it's almost like difficult things have been villainized, and challenge is our greatest opportunity for growth. You're not growing, you're not improving when things are easy, when things are just come with little effort, and you don't value those things, and things that we need to earn, we value those things so much more. And it's through going through the challenge that builds the character and makes the person become the person that they need to be, because it's you be the person and you do the things that person would do, and then you get to have the things that that person has. It's through that process of the being, the doing, and the having that you get to then receive that result. So many people try to do it backwards by going and buying the thing to have the certain thing that says that they do this certain thing, and then they have that reflected in their identity that they have this thing, when it's about becoming that person that has those attributes, or that character that speaks a certain way, that does certain things, that communicates a certain way, that shows up and has that sort of physique and presents himself a certain way. It's through that beingness and going through that process of developing the self that creates the king. It creates the king archetype. And and it's back to, does society, do they want the king? Can they handle the king? No, because that king is a threat. And people that have a king, if you have a healthy family and a happy family, there's no turmoil. That family can't be controlled. They don't need any drugs. They don't have to, go report to this certain person for these procedures, or the gatekeepers to knowledge or information. It's like, no, there's a reason that you're supposed to go to school and be indoctrinated and go to these gatekeepers of information to receive the information, or to get access to do the certain things, or the drugs or the medications, or the things that we need to be healthy, the medicine. It's like, instead, it's like, just take care of yourself and become that man that has the knowledge and the wisdom, and that can be a leader, because so many men can't be leaders. They're looking for someone else to lead, because through being a leader forces you to have to take responsibility. And that's a hard thing to swallow, because then you're responsible for your success and you're responsible for your failures. In a world where we don't want to talk about failures, or we don't want to talk about pain or discomfort. And I mean, even when it comes to content on the internet, you can't even really talk about pain or solutions, because that's a whole nother thing. But because they don't want you to see that there's ways to overcome pain. It becomes controversial. It becomes offensive a lot of times. And if a person can overcome pain themselves, or if they can be comfortable with the discomfort of pain, that's dangerous, because that person now can't be controlled through lashings, or through whippings, or through demeaning words, or they can't get their feelings hurt. It's like, if you can become and create yourself as a weapon and go through a process of sharpening your sword, that's very threatening. And that's the type of man that a woman should want, because that's a man that can be a protector, that isn't going to fall into being persuaded a certain way based off of being gaslit by our own government, that this is the epitome of health, when this is the epitome of mental illness and physical disease. It's like, we need to be able to discern, and it's going to get even harder as we move forward now in 2025 with this development of AI. And we can see just in the last 2 weeks with VO3, now you have these videos that look hyper realistic that the normal person can't distinguish or discern whether this is real or not. And this is going to be, if we thought we were on a war of information the last 2 decades, buddy, it's about to get a bit squirrely. And it's tough to discern information as it is on, what the right diet is, the right workout, or the right exercise to get this certain muscle. Dude, we are in for a reckoning ahead. And I think this is where it's each and every one of our individual responsibilities to, especially as a man, to take control of your mind and how you think and how you speak, the words you use, how you present yourself, which is being a man of your word and keeping your word and doing what you say you're going to do. Becoming a monster where you can physically develop yourself, become healthy, not just looking good, but being healthy, because health is the precursor to being aesthetically attractive. So instead of trying to jump the gun and get procedures and surgeries and be aesthetically appealing and attractive, it's like just become healthy and lose fat, build muscle, have higher levels of testosterone. Right there, you're going to become more attractive. So when I say that we can become so much more independent and sovereign by taking control of our health, it does require responsibility. But by doing that, that's where we can really be the most independent and the most sovereign that we can be. And I think it's now more important than ever to see how disconnected we've become from nature and from our primal human roots, as we say. As we get farther and farther from that, the disease, the depression, the despairs become even worse. But if we project forward what's ahead, it doesn't look pretty. And I think this is the turning point where we're going to start to see a division of those people that fall into the old narrative versus the people that kind of fall into more of the newer sort of almost like a new sort of Puritan movement where we're going to see people that want to be healthier, that avoid plastics or these drugs, and understand that it can be so simple. And just by taking control of our own health, this is ultimately freedom. Because if you don't have your health, you really don't have any freedom.
Couldn't have said it better myself, man. Yeah, it's so much of that, I could unpack for hours here, but I know we are running out of time. But yeah, dude, I really I agree with you 100%. It's like, I mean, the you hit it right on the head. It's self-responsibility and it's self-accountability. And once you can teach yourself to master those things, that everything in your life is your own fucking fault in one way or another. Like, period. You can seek external for, and I think that is a very masculine tenet. Like, that is, I think that is one of the principles of masculinity is that self-accountability. It's like there's no one else to blame because you're the one that's supposed to provide, you're the one that's supposed to protect. So if anything breaks down in the fucking chain, it's 100% your fault. And whether it's your fault indirectly or directly is irrelevant. It's your fault. So wrapping your mind around that and finding ways, to challenge yourself and to take yourself out of your comfort zone, I think is the antidote to all of this. And you're right, the physicality is an excellent place to start, but there's so many layers to it beyond that that it's like, and I think another, and I'll kind of wrap up on this. I think another really cool component to this is that as you grow as an individual and as you overcome these obstacles and these initiations and these rites of passage, your capability grows. So each one becomes more difficult, but the reward becomes greater, right? It's like, and you do things today that you thought were impossible 5 years ago. And the gym's another great example for this. So, like I benched 300 pounds for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I've remember, trying to get 155 pounds. I remember trying to get 135 pounds, 225. So it's like with every one of these obstacles that you overcome, the reward becomes greater and greater exponentially, right? So the process is very rewarding and it just becomes instinctual at a certain point. Like in the beginning, you have to force yourself because it's something new, it's something different. But after a while, undergoing these initiations and these, right, you don't even think about it. You're just constantly seeking the next one out because you know what the results, like you said, I do my best under pressure and under stress. If I can find something that is difficult and take myself out of my comfort zone, I do better. Like if I invest a bunch of money in a coaching program, I make more money because I work harder, because you know what I mean? I grind harder. I stay up later working. I get up earlier in the morning. And that's like universal. Like the more skin you have in the game and the more you challenge yourself, the better the results are going to be, man. We thrive and we crave it, man, on an instinctual level. So, dude, I
Dude,
think that's a great point to start. This is another one that like I've got notes for days and I could go on and on, but I think we kind of covered all some really cool shit there, and we can always go back and do a fucking part two.
yeah. Dude, there's one final thing I would say. Just
Yep.
you mentioned the self accountability aspect of it is it is our responsibility to be self accountable, but the problem is, like we're saying, is so many men don't have somebody that taught them how to be self accountable.
Yep.
So that's where it comes into hiring a coach, working with somebody that can keep you accountable, whether it's Ragnar, whether it's me, somebody that can keep you accountable and teach you what it means to be self accountable. And in a way, going through coaching program is an initiation. So just wanted to point that
Absolutely.
out.
No, that's a great point, you know, and it helps at all levels, really. It's like there never comes a point where you're not going to work harder when someone else that's comes back down to the band of men, you know, of having an esteemed leader that you trust, that's kind of mentoring you and guiding you and showing you the way, and has more information in a certain subject than you do and can help you grow in it better and faster and get quicker results and more profound results.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Yeah.
Awesome, dude.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was fucking awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, this is great. And dude, we can keep going on this for sure. There's so much more for us to unpack.
Yes, sir.